One of the things that interests me is the fact that revelation is a very strange phenomenon from a Jewish experience, from a Jewish perspective. I once wrote an article called Cloudy Revelation, and the idea behind that article was that revelation, if its intent was to simply give the answers, simply instruct people exactly what to do, then the Jewish understanding of revelation really has problems. Because our understanding of revelation has created a whole world of study of the Torah, intense study, with a lot of disagreements and a lot of divergent viewpoints and a lot of different ideas and so forth. And therefore, if God just wanted to tell us what to do, right and wrong, He didn't tell us in a clear, orderly fashion. And that leads to what was God's intent with revelation. Certain ways He gave over, straightforward directions, and in other ways He it's really very, very cloudy, as I said. Now, in addition to that, there is another aspect of revelation that is also inherently challenging, and that is the fact that revelation only happened to a certain people. Revelation at Sinai was to the Jewish nation. Yet that revelation did have some universal significance. Maimonides states that the whole world was affected by the revelation, that the commandments, the 7 Noahide laws, were part of the direction from revelation at Sinai to the entire world. So the question is why was there revelation only to the Jewish nation? Now, there are midrashim, there are rabbinic stories that say that when God revealed the Torah at Sinai, that the voice of Sinai was heard throughout the world, and that all the people, all the world heard the voice of God in Revelation. There are midrashim like that. There are sort of statements of that nature. However, the simple idea is that there was a revelation to the Jewish nation. And the question immediately arises, why specifically the Jewish nation? Why in that regard? So that leads me to a view of morality, consciousness that it's not the only reason I have this view, but it leads me to an interesting perspective about morality and revelation. That really within Jewish thought there are two major sources of morality. In other words, how we know right and wrong has two major points that it came from, and this yields a dialectic, yields some kind of tension. Okay, but the fact is that I want to deal about that tension between those two perspectives. One is that the source of what's right and wrong comes from the Torah, comes from revelation. But there's actually another source for right and wrong. Okay? Anyone want to guess where's the other source for right and wrong? And this source is actually universal.
Intuitive.
Okay, so where's the source of that? Where does that come from? Okay, but where do we have anything that we know about that tells us about the validity of this source?
Which source?
the source, you want to say the intuitive source of right and wrong. Because we have God saying something in terms of revelation, from above, telling us this is right, this is wrong, and then there's this other source of revelation, consciousness, intuition. But how do we trust this consciousness, intuition that has some legitimate place in our perspective of right and wrong?
Maybe it goes back again to Torah, which describes creation.
Yes.
And was connected with Adam.
Ah.
Right.
The fact is when Adam ate from the Eitzadas Tov Ra, when Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, they gained the knowledge of good and evil. That tree wasn't, the tree. There's a whole disagreement in the Gemara, in the Talmud, of what exactly was this tree. No one says it was an apple. It could have been an etrog, the citron that we take on Sukkot. It could have been the chita, wheat. But I don't think anyone says it was an apple. There's another argument. What? There's another argument why it came from an apple. But the point is that it was a perspective that said, there's a perspective that says that the Eitzadas Torah was the source for knowledge of good and evil. It was the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That's what it was, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And therefore they gained the knowledge of good and evil. What happens? They figured out there was a change in their persona. They had knowledge of good and evil. Now the truth is the snake said to them, okay, if you gain this knowledge of good and evil, you will be like an Elohim, you will be like a god. And commentators point out that the snake wasn't lying. That in order for Adam to be more godlike, he had to have knowledge of good and evil. Okay? He had to have knowledge of good and evil. This creates an interesting aspect of the story. There are a lot of commentators say, how could he not have knowledge of good and evil?
It means before he ate from the tree, whatever fruit he ate, he only had revelation.
He didn't have revelation.
He saw God.
Okay, well, he had revelation. The question is, what told him what to do, right or wrong? The point is you might be pointing to the fact that he might have only understood right and wrong because God told him right and wrong. But when you start having a feeling inside yourself, you have your own perception of what's good and evil. Okay? In other words, if you're totally a blank page and you say, okay, this is right, this is wrong, okay, fine. But what really is a greater ideal? Are you supposed to be someone who is constantly told what's right and what's wrong? You can't make the decision yourself? Or should you be someone who has some mechanism inside to feel good and evil? So it might be that Adam and Eve were relying upon God to tell them what's good and what's evil, fine. But then they developed within themselves this knowledge. And what the snake was saying is, you don't have that intuitive ability to tell what's good and evil yourself. You really can't be godlike. And guess what? The snake may be right. You know what's interesting about that? This is that a lot of comments point out the fact. So there's a big question. So why did God not tell them it was okay to do it? Okay, it's a real issue. Why? How could they not? How could they not have this ability? Because what was the prime directive to Adam and Eve? Right? They were supposed to be pru urvu umilu et haaretz v'kivshuha. They were supposed to go forth and multiply, spread throughout the earth, and conquer it. They were supposed to have dominion over the world. Human beings were supposed to develop the world. The fact is, what does a human being have? He's created in the image of God. So if he's created in the image of God, then they obviously becoming more and more godlike. You say Matari Odea. would be a very important aspect of life. So how could God say don't eat from, or don't go after the source that will give you the ability to have knowledge of good and evil? It's an interesting question.
Isn't the act of making a decision, so it's like a child, right? If I say to my son, you can't do X,
Mm-hmm.
right? And let's say he has no knowledge of right or wrong because he's very young, right?
Right.
And I say, you know what? In this house, everything's yours, but you know what? You're not allowed to go in this cupboard,
Right.
right? So doesn't he learn the concept of right and wrong
Right.
just by following that instruction?
Interesting question.
And he puts condition till you're older.
Well, God
You
didn't say
can't-
that.
Well, God didn't say that in that case, right?
Eventually, it was meant for them. This is why
The
the
fact is that he may. The question is, do you really understand good and evil within himself? Does he understand your perception of good and evil? In other words, does he have it within himself? Do you understand that you've said not to do it, therefore I shouldn't do it? Does he understand it himself? Does he understand what the problem is? You know, there's a very interesting idea that Adam and Eve, after they ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, they put on clothes, right? They clothed themselves, right? Okay. Fact is that there's actually two aspects in the story about clothes. One is Adam and Eve took their own clothes first. They took leaves and tried to cover themselves up first, right? Then God made them clothes. And God gave them clothes. Now, that was very interesting. But God's clothes are much more fuller, and there's different viewpoints of what the clothes were, but they're much more real clothes. But a lot of people assume that the whole issue of clothes had something to do with it's always, people think it's only about sexuality, right? And there's a whole issue that, that it's obviously with sexuality and so forth. But the fact is there's a lot in Jewish thought that points to the fact that we wear clothes for an aspect of what's called kavod habriot, just the aspect of propriety, just the aspect of how we carry ourselves. You know, the idea that clothes make the man. In a certain way, how we dress defines who we are. So in a certain way, Adam and Eve wearing clothes was not just about sexuality. It was a matter of an aspect of their own human dignity. Okay? And where did they get this idea of dignity? Because the idea of their own consciousness. Okay? They didn't just respond. I think it's a good idea what you're saying about good and evil. But the fact is, it wasn't just responding to an outside source, it's they had to have this sense within themselves. Now, why that had to come about in the way it did, or the result of that is a whole question in its own right. But it's very, very interesting. You know, there was a time, actually, Rabbi Skobach used to be the Hill director down at U of T. And he asked me once to speak. There was one of the I guess divinity colleges of U of T wanted to have a session with a rabbi and one of the professors. I guess he was a minister. And Rabbi Skobach got me to go and speak to him, to be the rabbi representative to speak to him. So, and these were all, like, I guess, people trying, being candidates for the ministry, for Christian ministry, and I was sitting there with their professor, and we were talking about this a topic of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And I said to one of them, I said, you do recognize that the word sin is not found in that story whatsoever. You know when the first time sin is found in the Bible? The word Hecht, the first time sin is found? Like Cain and Abel. The word sin is not found in that story whatsoever. And I still remember there was this student, this obviously graduate student, it was trying to be Christian minister. And I feel like I pulled the rug underneath from his whole belief system.
Well, yeah, obviously it would, right? It's the whole original sin concept, right?
So
He's gone.
So he says, what? Where's this not found? He looked over to the minister, like to the professor, says, is that true, sir? You had to get some, and the professor just says, Yes, the word is not found in the text. Oh, that's a Paulist understanding of the text. Good. Okay.
It's Paul's misunderstanding.
Right. Okay.
That's a pretty big. It's like missing the cornerstone of your structure, right?
Right. So that's exactly it. So the fact is that, but that's very, very significant, because there are Jewish sources that seem to point to the fact that just labeling that as sin is not really on. It's much more of an event that happened. That this was what happened, and there was mechanics that went on. There's commentaries talking about the fact that Eve felt, listen, if I'm supposed to be like God and develop into being more like God and develop like God, then I need this knowledge, and there's tension. I'm supposed to be like God, and so forth and so forth. So there's a whole tension. Why did God say not to do it, and so forth? And that created a tension of a different type of mechanic of what happened.
Sin of Adam or fall of Adam? Fall and sin the same would be the same when we describe it.
From the Christian perspective would be. See, from us it's a little bit different. It was something that happened that changed the nature of man, and that needed man to become an entity who could make decisions.
It was not a sin.
Even within Jewish thought, it's referred to as Hecht, as a sin of Adam, but it's not a simple sin.
Mm-hmm.
The fact is, if you know, my perception is that I would not call it a sin in the normative way. It was something that happened, but really what happened is that humanity had to develop an idea of how to understand good and evil, how to make moral decisions, intuition, feelings, and so forth.
Just doesn't. I'm sorry to interrupt, but doesn't just the act of disobedience teach that almost?
Possibly.
Never mind, the fact
Possibly.
that maybe that it actually intuitively gave them some sort of knowledge, but
Possibly.
just the act of disobeying would
Possibly.
create that consciousness.
Possibly.
But it's a different disobeying. They say that Hava didn't disobey. She wanted to do something extra. Sometimes you ask for a cup of tea and they bring cookie with the tea.
Right.
They disobey you.
Right.
Okay.
But from the
There are different aspects of what was happening there. It's aspects. It's like I just heard someone compare it to your parents coming at the airport and they say, "Don't worry, don't pick us up. It's all right, don't pick us up. We'll just take a cab in." But you go and pick them up anyways, right? But you don't listen to your parents. So there's different aspects of what the mechanics were. But the fact is, it just tells us that what happened between Adam and Eve. You have to understand something. From the Jewish perspective, from the Torah perspective, and it always bothers me how Adam and Eve are portrayed. Okay? Adam and Eve were beings that we don't fully understand, but to think of them as anything less than brilliant, sophisticated thinkers and so forth, is a tremendous travesty. Adam was created by God, right? What was his first task? He named all the animals. Why? God entrusted him with the job of naming all the animals. He was told to go forth and have dominion over the world. He had to have enough knowledge of the world to be able to say, "I see this animal, this is the right name for this animal." He thought about how every animal should be named, right? And there was a tremendous amount. They were remarkably, they were created by God. They're great people. The way people portray them as little children running around a garden, it's totally false. But the point is they had to have this knowledge of good and evil, and there was a certain way where man was to develop this knowledge of good and evil and apply it in determining how to live in the world. There's a whole question when the flood came about. Right? Mankind was punished through the flood. Okay. Well, where did mankind where were they told what was right and wrong? Where were they told what they were supposed to do in order to be punished? Did they ever have a statement that say this? Now, there are people who say that God did give Adam and Eve certain rules or whatever. But the fact is that other people point out that no. we had an intuitive understanding of right and wrong. And the flood, Tower of Babel, Sodom, right? Sodom and Gomorrah. These are people who all violated their own moral understandings. The fact is that we as human beings have a certain knowledge of right and wrong. God placed this within ourselves. Okay? Our understanding of right and wrong does not just come from revelation. Okay? We are given an intuitive understanding of right and wrong. Okay? Yeah.
So then, we know it, but we can't manage the temptation? Is that what happens? That we can't control ourselves?
No, we know it. Why?
It's like knowing we know how to lose weight, but we don't do it.
Okay.
It's like, so we know what's right and wrong, but we...
So what do you mean? That's why we need revelation? How does that change anything?
Well, I'm just saying, so we have this instinct of what's right and wrong, but if you look at the world, now I don't know, but I would say the majority are not doing right. So
right. So there's obviously some problems in this doing this right and wrong. People don't really follow through in it correctly and so forth.
But doesn't the real problem come about when society, like our society today, justifies behavior by saying they didn't really know, because what you're really saying is there's an intuitive understanding of right and wrong.
Right.
And today we say, that person messed up in life because they didn't really have an understanding of the consequences, but the consequences are obvious for certain behaviors, right? It's only if you allow them to sort of have that out.
What you're pointing out is that we have an intuitive understanding of right and wrong, but that intuitive understanding of right and wrong is has issues and questions with it. Okay? First of all, it's not necessarily always easy to understand right and wrong. Like I like to point out that really I don't think, remember, as a child when you're watching cartoons, there's a little devil, little angel, right? Okay.
The devil made me do it?
Yeah, that's why most people look at the choice of right and wrong. That's really not true. If you look at everything, it's usually a choice between two values, both of them having some correct manifestation at a certain point in time. However, you have to make a decision of which value should have the priority. Really, the choosing of what is right and wrong is really choosing the value that should supersede. Okay? And if you look at it, you're basically looking at many situations of right and wrong as which value should be the one that wins, the one that's on top. Okay? See, when I think about the idea of what did Adam and Eve learn, okay, and if you want to read, there's an article on our website, I think I mentioned to you, Nishma.org, there's an article about the tree of knowledge of good and evil. You can read about it in more extensiveness there, but the fact is of what I believe God gave us is the intuitive aspect of knowing values, of feeling for values. Okay, let me give you an example. Okay, we know that stealing is wrong, right? But if you heard of a person who stole a loaf of bread, right, in order to feed his starving family, would you say that person did something wrong?
Yes, but with an explanation.
Wait, no. See, that already is that.
Like the self-defense in that way.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Isn't it
fine.
justified in such a circumstance in terms of...
Okay, and what happens if the person says, "I'm not going to steal that loaf of bread," and his children die? Think that person did something right?
No, you're right. I mean, at the end of the day, you got to pick the lesser of two evils at that point.
Or you have to decide. There's a value there's a value in other people's property. There's a value in life. Okay, how do you balance those values? That's what it all comes down to. You know what I mean? And the fact is that in a certain way, I can almost turn every issue into some balance of values. It might be that in the thing that the grossest examples of evil, I could find an aspect where the person has a value, but it's a value that's down here, and it's up against a value over there, and he chose to make it like this. Yeah.
I have an example.
Okay.
Tiger Woods.
Yes.
How do you find good in it?
Okay. Why?
Well, do you know what happened?
Yes, I know what happened. But you see, what you're asking is you have to get more into whole issue of values. The fact is that it's a little bit difficult, I must admit.
Well, his behavior more sent. It wasn't like a situation where he fell in love with maybe two women and couldn't decide, and which does he choose? I mean, you're talking about he's got a serious psychological problem, right? Which
when
I think
hit
clouds.
14 and up, I think it's.
It wasn't the same time. It was in succession.
Yeah.
I heard it was also at the same time. But
Maybe he's not good with breaking up. He's a nice person.
Oh, that's a good one.
He doesn't want to
hurt anybody.
Okay, I'm going to take this a little bit. I'll give you another example. Let me give you another example of what I mean by this different way of looking at it. Let's take example of. I don't want to get an impression that there's no such thing as evil. Evil is when you place a value in an inappropriate place. Okay, in other words, there's two values. If you set value A over value B, it may be that this value A has some value in it, but by placing it over B, that's evil. That's evil. By totally ignoring the value of B, that's wrong. It's not, that's evil. So let me give you an example. Is nationalism a good thing? Let me ask you, you guys following the Olympics?
No, but I saw the torch.
Okay.
I don't think it was on yet, but
okay.
Nationalism is nice. I mean, to see your country win.
Okay. Okay. I don't think nationalism. Little pride, Canadians, Canadian flag. I wouldn't say it's. No, there's nationalism, right? Okay. Now you take nationalism, and you put it against universalism. Okay. It becomes a little bit more of a tension. We as nationalists, we nationalism, we say, listen, we have a commitment to Canadians before the entire world, right? So we're willing to extend OHIP to other Canadians, but we can't extend OHIP to the rest of the world. So when we hear of I have a brother-in-law. My brother-in-law founded an organization called Validity. I don't know if you guys ever heard of it. It's a Jewish humanitarian organization. It deals with helping people all over the world. Validity. Validity.
Too happy with what they were doing at that point.
Validity. VEAHAVTA.
Which translates into like
we shall love. Okay. The fact is that he told me that Sick Kids Hospital, they have a program where they go every year down to Guyana. And Sick Kids Hospital gives them the right to have. They'll pay for one operation. Total, all expenses paid, covered for an operation for one child on their thing list. And the doctor who made that decision, he was over on a Friday night, and with my brother-in-law, he said it was one of the most difficult decisions he had to make. He had to decide if there were 2 or 3 kids. The chances were, if they didn't get the operation, they would die, and he had to make the decision of which kid would get this free operation. Now you think about this, and think about the fact that in Ontario, right, every kid in Ontario can get the operation just by being Canadian, right? By being Canadian. But the fact is that the structure of the world is is there's nationalism concern, universalism concern. The fact is because there's some reasons for that to develop society and so forth. But that's tough. It's tough. We're always working with this challenge of universalism and nationalism. But there's an interesting side to this. Okay? I can say that there's a place for nationalism. But I can also say that if you place nationalism over universalism, there's even a time when nationalism would go over universalism. However, if you place nationalism over to universalism to the total extent of ignoring universalism, you get evil. Okay?
Called Nazi.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I remember once I had a program with 20 people in the room, and I said, do you think Adolf Hitler thought he was doing something good or wrong or bad? And there was one guy who understood the challenge. If I said that, and he knows where it was going. If I said, if he knew if he knew he was doing bad, then we all know it's doing bad. I mean, like, why would you do it? Why? What's the idea of this? But the fact is, if he said no, he thought he was doing good, then you have a problem with defining good and evil. So the point is, though, what happened with the tree of knowledge of good and evil is the fact that you develop these feelings of values, the intuitions of values, and you develop some knowledge of how to balance them in the broadest ways. You sort of understand, A over B. I mean, any human being, any normal human being, can clearly see that Nazism is nationalism, gone wild. Okay? But that's really what evil is about. Evil is about you have a drive, and you have two drives, and you do drives. Let's go back to Tiger Woods. I would say that I'll take an extreme. Okay, is human beings, and this is just off the top of my head now. So just I'm trying to let's say. Do you think there's a value in human beings having pleasure?
Yeah.
Oh, there is a value in human beings having pleasure.
It's good for your well-being.
It's good for your well-being. It's also extremely important in your relationship with God. It's very important. You all know the story of Isaac and Esau and Jacob with the blessing, right? Isaac tells Esau, "Go and make me some venison, bring it back, and I'll give you a blessing," right? So a lot of people, a lot of whatever commentators on the Bible, joke down, go feed the old man wants food, so bring it back. That's not what happened there. This is a natural consequence. There's a statement that says, and you see it even by some Hasidic rabbis today when they want to give a blessing, is they eat something good. And you know what happens when you have a positive experience, when you have an enjoyable experience? It goes to his son brings him back, a good meal the way he likes it, and he takes it, he feels good. There's an uplifting aspect of it. We're human beings. Taste something good, you have a good reaction to it. Fact is once you have it, you also are appreciative of the person who made this delicious meal for you. And if you're appreciative, it really gives you an aspect of a blessing. So the point is that you're in a better mood to give the blessing.
And also you are able to more thank the giver.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So if you have pleasure, the fact is there actually is a value in seeking pleasure. There actually is a value in seeking pleasure. We don't have the same dichotomy as other people think between physical and spiritual and that. The fact is that God created pleasures for us to have in the world, and that there is a thing. There's a famous story actually of a famous rabbi in the 1800s called Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch. I don't know if you heard of him before. He was a major rabbi in Germany. Okay, he was the rabbi of who really developed the idea of what's called Torah im derech eretz, Jews in the world, and he called upon Jews to know secular studies as well as Torah and so forth. And before he died, there was a story that says that he was getting older in life. He woke up one day and he says, "I have to go to the Alps. I have to go to the Alps." And he was very serious. "I got to go to the Alps today." And you had someone, come on, just take me to the Alps. I want to go to the Alps. And someone else says, why is it so significant for you to go? Like, what's happening? All of a sudden he says, I've been alive for so many years, I never went to the Alps. I'm going to die one day. I'm going to go up to heaven. And God's going to ask me, no, what do you think of the splendor of my creation, the Alps? Wasn't it a majestic feeling when you went out there? I'm going to sit there and say, I'm sorry, I never went. You were 30 minutes away? I created this, and you didn't enjoy it? He says, I can't do that. I have to go. The fact is, so I can take this to the extreme, that human beings want something. Now, the fact is that if you just want pleasure, just for the sake of pleasure, right, just follow that, let's call it value even, right, what can happen? Hedonism. You totally ignore everything else, right? So maybe that's what I look at Tiger Woods as maybe a guy, he's avaricious in certain ways. Okay, that may have a point in time where you want to develop your own needs and so forth. So there comes a certain point in time where there's other restrictions on you, such as commitments to your wife, maybe you commit, maybe there's other commitments, family.
So he took the value of pleasure and he took it so far that it imploded.
Even forget who gave it as well, and then they started to block the giver, and did whatever he wanted, right? So that's when there's a point I think a person reaches, either to choose to stay with the giver or just to go within yourself and just worship yourself.
Yeah, that's another consideration. But the fact is that at this point in time, I'm still working on Adam and Eve's construct. Okay? God created a situation where Adam and Eve developed their own moral perceptions. Okay? Now, there's two aspects of developing the moral perceptions. One is the understanding of the values, the understanding of these feelings, and the second one is in making the judgment between those feelings. One is like for example, you see someone you want to give charity. One is the idea of it's good to give charity. Then there's the question of judgment. You look back and say, wait a second, this guy I'm going to give charity to, he's just going to turn around and use it in a negative fashion if I just give him the money or something like that. So I have to use my judgment, right? There's certain situations where even in terms of giving charity, 10 people come up to you for charity, they all have needs, but you only have enough to give to 2 of them. You have to make a decision. Who am I going to give to, right? There's certain situations even where you should all give a little bit of charity, but there's certain situations where you give charity at your own expense. This concept that that don't forget you also are a creature of God, and you have to take care of yourself as well. So the point is that there's the two aspects of developing the knowledge of this knowledge that comes from the intuition, and then there's the aspect of making that decisions, and that was something that Adam and Eve had to learn. Those are the dynamics.